Hi guys, Mrs. B here. Today I'm going to talk with you about how we multiply and divide fractions. So when I look at this, I think, how can I find 4/5 of 2/3? And the algorithm's really simple. So when we've got two fractions multiplied together, we multiply the top together and the bottom. So I'll have something like this. 2 times 4 divided by 3 times 5, which gives me 8 over 15. And I might think about, well, can I simplify that any further? And I know I can't, because when I look back up here, there are no common factors in my numerator and my denominator. So 4 is made up of only 2's, and 3 and 5 are prime. Nothing's the same, so I know that that's the simplest form for that fraction. A common mistake that people make is when we multiply a number by a fraction. So if I've got something like 2 times 4/5, okay, and a common mistake is that think the same thing, I multiply the top and I multiply the bottom, and we end up with something, a false statement, that is it's 2 times 4 divided by 2 times 5, which is 8 over 10, which is less than 1. Now if we think back to the question, 4/5 is nearly 1, 2 lots of 4/5 is going to be much more than 1. So to get an answer that is still less than 1 must be wrong. So what helps me, let's just make that not equal to, is to think about 2 as 2 divided by 1. Alright, any number divided by 1 is itself. So 2 divided by 1 now looks like a fraction, and I can apply this thinking again. So I multiply the top and I multiply the bottom, and I will get 2 times 4 divided by 1 times 5, and get the correct answer of 8 over 5. Now I like to think of dividing fractions in terms of a half. If I take a half of a half, meaning a half times by a half, I get a quarter. Right? I've got a half of a pizza, divide it in half, I've got a quarter. Well, we know multiplication and division are inverses of each other, so I have to do the opposite of timesing by a half. And the opposite of timesing by a half is timesing by 2. So if I had a sum like this, what we're saying is if I was multiplying by a half, I would divide by 2. Now I'm dividing by a half, I've got a times by 2, so we're saying that this is the same as a half times 2. And we're going to think of 2 as 2 divided by 1 again. And notice a difference in these two last fractions. It's upside down. I've just flipped it. So if I had a different sum, let's say 4/3 divided by 2/5, I'm going to apply the same thinking and say, well, that's the same as 4/3 times by 5 halves. Now I can do that sum because I know how to multiply fractions. I multiply the top and the bottom, and I'll get 4 times 5 divided by 3 times 3. Now if there were common factors, I could cancel them here, but there aren't. 3 is prime, 4 and 5 don't have factors of 3, so I'll get 20/9.